And it's partly for that reason that the sort of subacute help becomes so important. And we had, Rachel mentioned this, we had a policy led by the Department of Health with the Department for Education of rolling out mental health support teams across schools, both primary and secondary. I'm not here to make any political points. I've yet to really understand fully what the new government's supposedly new policy about putting mental health support in school, how that relates to the thing that's already happening. But we shall find out, no doubt, over the time to come. And then at a lower level still, I think we need to have a big focus throughout school and throughout society, because it's all of our job. It is all of our job on helping children to build up their resilience. I'm just going to show you one more thing. Not that. This. It's the most basic thing in the world. So CAMS did a pilot study in a bunch of primary schools, one of which completely coincidentally happened to be the primary school my own children were at in Hampshire, genuinely coincidentally, of trying to work out what were the things that could help primary school age children just cope with life. And if you look at this list, there are some kind of medical-ish sounding things, but there's also it's mostly about stuff that, is part of life, and making sure you have the broad range of experiences, having somebody there to be able to tell you that it's okay, just take some time, take a moment, get outside, run about. All of these things actually help at that sort of base level of resilience. I would also just want to finish on saying, absolutely agree with what Dr. Smith said about, and indeed Dr. Bagnall said about family support, and that perinatal period in the first 1,001 days of baby's life are so incredibly important. I think the Supporting Families program, which we don't talk about that much these days, actually is just coming into the Department for Education, and I hope that can be a big force for support and change. But look, I think I've probably gone on a bit too long. I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to abuse Chair's privilege, ask a couple of questions, and I'm going to come to the audience. So do get your thinking caps on for good questions. But I want to start by kind of probing a little bit the relationship between mental health, subjective well-being, and kind of attainment, both from the perspective of schools themselves. How does this relate to what we might think of as the core business of schools, which is about learning first and foremost, and to pick up Damian's point about potentially is there tension? How do we kind of balance that tension between building resilience, kind of pushing, which at the time when you're going through something that's difficult and challenging, it might not feel particularly pleasant. How do we make sure that we're stretching children and young people, but not to breaking point? So who'd like to kind of come in on any tension there, if there is any?
So just to say, and this is very important, everyone has mental health. Yeah? And some people unfortunately develop mental illness, and it's probably about 20% of the population, 20 to 25% of the population. The people who are more likely to develop mental health problems, actual clinical illnesses, are those who have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. We know that people who are in the bottom 20% income bracket in society are children, the poorest children are 4 times more likely to have a mental illness than those who are in the top 20% income bracket. So mental health is something that everyone has, and everybody needs to be supported and taught resilience so that you are able to cope with the slings and arrows that are going to be thrown at us during our lifetime. And that will help everybody. But again, we can identify those people who are at higher risk of mental illness who will also benefit from being taught resilience. So that's something we can do in schools and in education. But they are the people who we are going to have to intervene with. And it is the family support that's needed. It's not something about this child. It's what can you do to surround sound this child with the family or the proxy family. Because if they don't have a family, which in and of itself is a problem, they don't have loving caregivers, then you have to surround sound them with something else. And I think Rachel described it very nicely. we identify these children often at the time they're at school, and so then put everything in place. And what they're doing in Norway really does make sense. That's essentially what they're doing. They're surrounding these children with proxy families. And to the point about social media that Damian made, actually, social media might fill the void that the parents leave. If your parents are not around because they're working 2 jobs or whatever it is, then that void will be filled by something else or someone else. And it might be a gang, it might be social media, it might be your gang on the internet. So that parental relationship is key.
Any other thoughts here, Charlotte?
So on the point about sort of the link between emotional well-being and mental health, so I would argue emotional well-being is probably more important. Emotional well-being and academic attainment is more important than academic attainment, and this is in line with something called attentional control theory. But this theory argues that when we're struggling to cope, we spend more energy on, coping and managing that resource than we do spending that energy on completing a task. So it interferes with our cognitive processing. So if children aren't emotionally well, they are going to struggle with learning. So I think we need to address that first. I also completely agree with the point that Damian made about that we can't remove challenges in young people's life. And I think that is the basis of the talking about transition curriculum. So we can't remove the transition from primary school to secondary school. We know this is going to be a time of challenge, it's going to be a time of threat for young people. But what we can do and what we most definitely should be doing is helping children to develop the skills that they'll need to be able to cope with that. That is, yes, drawing on support from parents, peers, teachers, so learning how to manage new relationships with teachers at secondary school, but it's also helping to develop those problem-solving skills, helping them, how do I strike up a new conversation with a new friend? What do I do if I get lost? How can I ask for help? With regards to social media, there is a study at the University of Manchester called the SOME study, and it's by someone called Dr. Margarita Panayiotou. She is looking at young people's perceptions of social media. So what they see as the positives of it, but what they also see as the negatives of it. It's just being funded by UKRI. So it's very, very preliminary at the moment. But I definitely take a look at that. There's a website, there's lots of information out there. And they have started to do some of the focus groups asking young people's perceptions of that. Also about the point about absence rates over school transition, we know that is true. Like many children do start to not attend school as much during that period, and we know that can obviously have an impact on their attainment. It can impact the social adjustment because they're not navigating that transition alongside their peers, so they will be doing it on their own. Essentially, if they're not attending school during those first few months, so that can mean they're making an enhanced transition. So I think we do need obviously a lot more support and helping children to develop those skills, to develop those problem-solving skills, so they feel able to attend school and they feel able to be able to learn and make friends and socially adjust as well. I think I've gone off on a tangent.
Damian, raising school standards has been kind of one of the signal achievements of the services in government. Is that mutually supportive, or is there a tension and trade-off with emotional well-being as you see it?
I don't think there need to be a trade-off at all. I agree that actually sort of well-being, happiness of our children is the number one thing. And when you're a government minister and you say to a room full of parents, what is it you want for your children? You will always get exactly the same sentence back. In fact, let's do it now. I just want them to be happy. There you go. So that is, and I'm a parent myself, by the way, and I agree with that. That's what we all want. But we also want them to be able to fulfill their potential. And we know that actually, learning, discovering new things, and so on, actually can make you happy. And for them to be, for their future life, to be able to do all they can do and then start their own family and contribute to our society. Everything that happens at school is fundamental to that. So I don't see a conflict at all. Rachel,
well, and just to add, I just want to get a bit more accountability into the system around mental health. I mean, I have very few superpowers, but one of them is to call for data from anybody who works with children, right? I don't need to use FOIs. I publish a children's mental health report every year that looks at waiting times, who's turned away. We've got ridiculously long waiting times for children. Yes. I'm about to publish unseen data again. I have to get it out of these systems because they don't publish it. I'm about to publish NHS data that's never been seen before on waiting times for neurodivergent children and their diagnosis. Now, I actually think the standards debate is completely different. I need children to be treated, to be diagnosed, to be well, for teachers to be able to know what to do to help those children achieve. Getting a diagnosis is not like the end point, which of like, now you've got a diagnosis, it's all going to be fine. It's the start of and that's why when I was speaking, I was talking about the quality of childhood in this country, the quality of support for family life, making sure that services are working together, making sure that health deals with children quickly, because childhood lasts for such a short time, and that will take resourcing, it'll take a range of things, but also making sure that schools step up and do the bit that they need to do around, this is how we need to teach this child, or this is what these are the skills we need to have. So I actually think there's a huge accountability question for both government and for services, and a radical rethink needed. And I go back to the point that the language of mental health, anxiety, the lower inside of it, and actually even those with more serious diagnoses, often the solution is about relationships. It's about quality of life. It's about things that actually we don't need to medicalize. We actually just need to enact. You know, many of us grew up in I grew up in Scunthorpe, daughter of a steel worker, 5 brothers and sisters, no money, but I had an amazing quality of life. And there was no sense, because I had community, relationships, fun, and not a penny, often quite hungry actually. And there are not that I'm certainly not suggesting that poverty is a good thing, but the point is, creating functional communities and a functional childhood is a very different thing. It's not just about getting the diagnosis, even though services do need, I think, to work together for kids.
I have to say, I completely agree with what Rachel says. The fact that mental health problems are far more prevalent in poorer children is not because they are poor in terms of finances. It's what that is associated with. And that impoverishment of their lives is the really important thing. And there is a greater risk of them having adverse childhood experiences if they are poorer. And you have to remember that this will require a cross-government approach. And this isn't a health problem. Any time there's a policy, it should think in any government department, the Department for Trade and Industry should be thinking, all right, how will these policies impact children and children's mental health? The Department of Education, obviously, but the Department, DEFRA should be thinking what difference is it going to make, the kind of environments that we are engendering to children's mental health? Because, it sounds a bit cheesy, children, 25% of our population, 100% of our future. It's absolutely crucial that we are surrounding children with the supports that they need so they can thrive as adults.
Great. I'm sure there's lots of questions, so I'll open up. You almost jumped the gun there, so yourself there.
Different tack entirely to Damian Souza. You mentioned Norway and the justice thing. So my name is Christopher Cowdery. I'm a counsellor in Edinburgh. I'm on the education committee in Edinburgh. Also before that, I was on the children's hearing system in Scotland, which is a system. It started off being a sort of a judicial thing to get children out of the adult criminal system, but actually now mostly about 90% of it is about abuse and neglect rather than criminal justice. So anyway, my question is, you obviously have, I think, considered that when you were looking at what you might recommend in people?
Great, I'll take a couple more questions.
Deborah Taylor, Lade Member for Children and Families at Leicester County Council. I just wonder now, our main issue is getting people around the table. And until health and education are mandated, statutory responsibility to actually be around the table for children, we're not going to get anywhere. I remember sitting here last year and having exactly the same conversation. So is it time now to have a better care fund for children as we have for adults?
And lady in the front row here.
Sue Chan from The Telegraph. Does the panel think that labelling is helpful or harmful in terms of children themselves when it comes to mental health? And also just a quick one to Dr. Bagnall. The thing that struck me is that one of the things that you're working on in your programs is how to teach children to make friends. I thought it was one of the fundamental things that you make in primary school. I mean, have children lost their ability to make friends, and is that a symptom of lockdown?
We start with Charlotte, yeah.
Yes. So the question about making friends, I think when they transition to secondary school, some children are going on their own, so they're not going with an existing peer group, and that can be quite problematic in terms of making a new friend, because it's having that confidence to go up to someone and introduce themselves. So I don't think it's necessarily the skills of making friends, it's the confidence of being able to put yourself out there, which I think now some young people are struggling with. So as part of the curriculum, they do role plays, so they pretend that one of them's a new person and introduce themselves and strike up a conversation. There was a point made earlier about sort of reducing waiting times. I just speaking from personal experience, I used to work on the mental health support teams at the University of Exeter. That was my first academic role. And I worked in terms of training the educational mental health practitioners, and I thought that they were absolutely fantastic. So they worked directly in schools on group basis, one-to-one basis, and I just think it helped some young people who were obviously waiting for treatment for a mental health condition to provide just some initial support within school, just having someone to talk to, doing a group intervention, and I thought that personally worked quite well. It was a shame it's not rolled out wider.
Damian, do you want to come in?
So first of all, education and health working together, yes, absolutely. I don't know about whether the Better Care Fund approach is the way to do it or not. But obviously at local level, there is quite a lot of working together. Well, there is in some, I mean, it may not work perfectly in every local authority, but there is quite a lot of working together in some places. But obviously you always want to level up, to coin a phrase, to make everyone as good as the best. Labelling, no, in the pure sense, clearly, that's not helpful. But there is a version, of course, of, when, like in my generation, and some of us at my age, we can think back to exactly who this kid was, who was sitting in the corner of the class and was just pretty much ignored. And now we understand, that same kid today would understand what was the difficulty that they had. And that is helpful. So there's clearly a balance to be struck. On making friends, I'm not qualified to talk about making friends and the science of it is and all the rest of it. Although I would say, I think probably few people went through their childhood with no friend problems at all. It's one of the sort of features of being. I have 3 young children of my own now, and you see it. Things go well, things don't go so well, and you just want them to grow up. You want them to make lasting friendships they will carry with them through life. But they do have to work at it. It doesn't just happen like automatically. And it is yet another thing. I hate to sound like a broken record, but yet another thing that social media changes. It changes the nature of people's interaction with each other. This whole thing about I've been kicked off the group, or someone's left the group. It has a sort of significance that just didn't exist when we were growing up. And there's yet another thing we need to try to understand.
To pick up Sue's question, no point being chair if I can't abuse it sometimes. So my own research was looking at school choice specifically, and actually one of the kind of effects of school choice is it creates A, uncertainty, and B, kind of disperses children and breaks up those friend groups. Rachel, did you want to come in on the question on?
Yeah, and a few comments just to follow up on the labelling point. I think that's a powerful point. I think the way we use language as teachers is a really powerful point. And of course, you would have seen. I mean, from 2010 right through to when I came up the classroom, and even now. I saw that language of mental health very much become prevalent among children and young people as well, probably from lockdown. I think there's I've seen some of the best work where teachers are building those things like resilience that we've talked about through their everyday conversation. So it's like, I can't tell you the number of students who said to me, my life is over because I've just failed that exam. I think I failed that exam, I've come out, And my answer would always be, your life's not over tonight. And I think there's something about just that really don't make everything a whoosh. There's something about the way we use language as adults and remembering we are the adults and we can strengthen there. Did you ask me their health? Come back to this one. On abuse and neglect and children in prison. First of all, frankly, I close all bylaws. I think that if we're going to have young people and we're going to genuinely rehabilitate them, we might need them to be insecure, but certainly not in mock-ups of adult prison, and it deeply concerns me. I talk to every single child who's in prison, most of them who are a great success, actually. The Conservative government was getting that down to 420, but it's 420 too many young people in YOI, so it's about 1,000 in secure. They should all be in familial setups, even if it is secure, because basically your brain is developing. We've got to rehabilitate. And when you talk to them, and I talk to all of them, the stories are hideous. I mean, and they're not excuse stories. It's just that there are amazingly sad stories of abuse and neglect. But when I say, when were you last happy at school? It's the question I always ask. So I don't get a put on sob story. When were you last happy at school? The answer is normally 10 or 11. That's the point that diversion needs to happen. And what's your solution? You're going to get out at 25. The solution is on education, and they're not getting a proper education in there. So there is some real work to do in that system. And to the point about girls, because I don't want to ignore that, I've come at this in a slightly different way. There's no question that in my mind, that girls' self-image has been impacted by what they're seeing on social media and what they're in a much more intense and acute way than, say, when I was growing up, because you're seeing it all the time. And when I've done vast amounts of surveys on girls, you can see it all on our website, older teenage girls, about this. Interestingly, I think the place, when I talk to them about where they want to ask their questions, because they're full of questions. You know, most of them want to ask questions about being an adult, about sexuality, marriage, adult life. They want to get that from home and from trusted adults at school. And one of the things I'm most concerned about, and Miriam and I would have a real good ding-dong on this, is I think we need really good RSE in schools. We need to be teaching this really well and helping young people navigate it. Chris Whitty called me the other day, and he said to me, Rachel, I'm really worried. The gonorrhea and the syphilis statistics are going through the roof. The highest they've been since 1918 and 1945, respectively. Second fastest growing group are 13 to 19-year-olds. Like, what are they teaching in schools? You know, why are we, and the kids are looking at it, they're not teaching it like they should. So my challenge is we should be teaching children about, you know, relationships, about how to keep themselves well and safe, and about these things. And I think because there's all this sort of culture war debate, everybody's fighting about it, we're not just doing that sensible thing of supporting children properly on this stuff. And with girls, we really need to be supporting them both, you know, in terms of how to make good decisions about their lives and how to be empowered, and especially as they're also wonderful. And, you know, we want them to be not unhappy. We want them to feel wonderful and be empowered to go on. So anyway, I leave that point there. What's really?
So we're almost at time, so I'll give you, Lade, I'll give you the last words.
Thank you. Sorry that because although so many questions, but to the point about labelling, and actually the problem is that the word as you use it to is in and of itself is pejorative, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Implies somehow that if someone has what might be an actual diagnosis, that it's a problem. And that is also just goes to the point that we have a big problem with mental illness in this, not just in this country, actually, many places across the world, where it is highly stigmatizing to be thought of having a mental health problem. And things have changed, people are talking about it more, but still, and we've seen in the last year or so, if someone has an actual clinical diagnosis, then it's a big problem. And so actually, as Rachel has said, if someone has a mental health problem, that diagnosis is the start of them getting treatment that can mean that they will be able to thrive later on in life. Second point about, Deborah, you said about you know, should we be mandating support for children? Yes, absolutely. I sometimes think in this country, maybe we don't like children quite so much. The aspiration for providing children's mental health services for children who've been referred is that we meet 35% of their need. Imagine if this was leukemia and children had leukemia and saying, we're only going to treat 35% children. It's just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. We are not supporting children to thrive. All the structures that are needed are essentially about supporting children in terms of that kind of proxy family support and that parental support. And then, the final thing really is to say that there's no doubt at all that abuse and neglect is what underpins children not doing quite so well in life. And that can be very minor things. It doesn't matter what strata of society you're from. It can be thinking that it's okay for your kid to smoke cannabis when they're 13 or 14. It's not actually, because their brains are growing and they will be 5 times more likely to develop psychosis. Simple as that. That's a fact. There are so many things that we don't do. We just think that children are somehow going to bring themselves up. Rachel's right. School is a place that you can provide lots of this support and training, but it needs to be across the board. This is about communities, and our government helps us to shape and provide the infrastructure for what our communities are going to look like. And that is not just about health, that's not just about education, that's across every single department of government.
Brilliant. I mean, I thought that was an incredibly stimulating and wide-ranging conversation. A lot to cover there. Apologies that I didn't get around a fraction of the questions. I'm sure the conversation will continue. But since we're about to be kicked out of the room, all that's left for me is to say a few thank yous. So thank you to Policy Manchester for working with us to put the event on. Thanks to you for your attention and your questions. And thanks very much to the panel for their contributions. So thanks everyone.